Hello and welcome to the second session of Collaborate Virtual, the free online installment of our annual conference Collaborate. Firstly, I want to say a big thanks to Simon for his talk this morning, and we're looking forward to our talk at 3 p.m. hosted by our head of UX, Joe Knowles, and he'll be speaking on cultivating a resilient mindset. Up next, though, we have Sophie Freiermuth, director at Baguette UX, with her talk, Running Asynchronous Workshops. In this talk, Sophie will share with you a process to organize and run an asynchronous workshop and some advice to manage participant surprise. As always, please do say hello to each other in the chat. And if you could just make sure your chat settings are switched to panelist attendees so that everyone can see your messages, that'd be great. Please let us know if there are any issues with the stream there too. Also, please ask Sophie lots of questions using the Q&A box. Sophie will answer those as she goes through her presentation. So yeah, please do get involved. We're using auto-generated captions for this webinar. Some of them may not be 100% accurate. However, when we share the talks publicly, we'll ensure the transcripts are all accurate. So yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Sophie to kick things off.
Thank you. Let's go. Yeah, do ask all your questions. This is a real-time session. You've made the time to be with me instead of waiting to see it in your own time. So I will answer those questions in real time. I'm feeling like we're a little bit more connected. And connection is really important. I've been working for many years with teams all over the world, trying to run synchronously as digital tools develop progressively. And COVID, of course, has forced everyone to think differently, has stopped a lot of travel, and has stopped those massive workshops we were doing where everyone was training in or flying into a place and being locked in a room with pizza slid under the door. And running asynchronous workshops for me is a way of looking at how to utilize time better and how to leverage the power of everyone's time and competences. So let me talk you through how to do that through some experience. Thank you for joining. Hey, Steve, lovely having you here. Ask your questions and come in. What do I mean by asynchronous? It is a big world. Right now I'm working with a client who's based in Germany with team players based in the US and in Canada. It doesn't seem that much. You might be thinking US, 6-7 hours behind, that's okay, kind of manageable. Let me show you what synchronous meetings look like if I'm trying to coordinate with a colleague who's based in Milwaukee and another who's based in Vancouver. We literally have 1 to 2 hours a day if we're trying to work within a reasonable day, one that doesn't start at 4 a.m., one doesn't end at 11 p.m., because we really shouldn't have to unless we want to. And guess what? When all you have to work with somebody is a couple of hours every day, and that's the only 2 hours everyone has across multiple work locations, those hours get booked very quickly. So we have to be quite specific in how to work. And furthermore, it's not just Barcelona, Milwaukee, and Vancouver. I don't know if you've ever worked with the US and China, but I've had some 4 a.m. calls trying to stay awake. And all I could think of was do not snore, do not snore, do not snore. So how do you switch to asynchronous? Let's start with a little bit of a definition. By asynchronous, I mean everyone in their own time and by a certain deadline. So we're using time as an expense rather than time as a defined box time in a very contracted period. We're using the power of longevity. We're using time spread across multiple days, possibly multiple weeks. I'm going to be using asynchronous in this workshop on the slides with a capital A so you can really spot, because I'll be comparing at first how the two work. And let's go back to the basis of what makes a good meeting and workshop. Well, it's quite a simple solution. It's purpose and time and people and place. So let's start by reviewing how these 4 things compare when you're running synchronous and asynchronous workshops. Let's start with purpose, which should really be your very, very first and primary concern when you're running a meeting or a workshop. Always remember, would it be better to do this over an email or a Slack message or whatever tools of communications you have that doesn't take real-time interactions or asynchronous interactions, as we'll see, of everyone together. Well, what is best for synchronous in terms of purpose is when people's questions need to be answered right away, when time really isn't the essence, when delaying answers means delaying solutions, and that is a negative. Also, you want to have synchronous meetings and workshops when there is a likelihood of strong disagreement or opposing positions. let me phrase it the other way around. You do not want to let any strong feelings, strong emotions, strong personalities let loose without the constraints of an opportunity for immediate management, conciliation, negotiation. And you want all bad news to be given synchronously. People feel it's terribly unfair when they don't learn directly in due time. For asynchronous workshops, what I recommend are the best is when complex input is required. And complex input can be ideas, thoughts, insights, data points, knowledge that may not be at the tip of a person's finger. And when you may need to think exactly how to frame it, asynchronous might work best. And also when all inputs are equally valued, which is not necessarily easy in many organizations. I will cover this a little bit more at the end. And also for early discovery, when you're intaking a lot of insights, a lot of information, when you're trying to amalgamate considerable amounts of positions, thoughts, ideas, points of knowledge, points of data, and so on and so forth. And for asynchronous, all good news. If it's a good news, it can wait a little bit more. And I think one of the worst use of people's time is being called all together for announcing something like so-and-so is a new VP. And there's quite often a bit of rumbling going like, really, I stopped my lunch for that. They would have stopped their lunch for bad news, but good news is not worth it generally. So decide first of all that if your purpose is appropriate for synchronous or asynchronous. These lists are not exhaustive. You can feel free to build these up. So I think we'll discover as we run particularly more asynchronous meetings and workshops, we will learn a lot more what works best for those. And then time. So how do you do it best for synchronous when everyone is well into the ordinary, decent working hours? I think it seems kind of obvious, but I have seen people being called in to give presentations at their 3:30 a.m. and the presenter saying, oh, I hope you've had lots of coffees, was replied with actually, I didn't because I'm going back to sleep after because it's 3:30 a.m. here. You really don't want this kind of snappiness. It would have been maybe an idea to schedule that person another time, but it happens. So best for synchronous when you need to tap into people's power focus hours. Now, your power focus hours are not necessarily your working hours, but it's a very interesting concept that some people have been able to discover as working remotely or working asynchronously has developed. For example, my power focus hours are late afternoon. It's 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. In those hours, I can tackle the most complex information, the most gnarly problems, and really work it through. My brain is full on. It kind of ramps up between starting from 3 p.m. I am super powerful between 4 and 8, and it ramps down then to 10. And after 10, I'm far less productive. And it's interesting that this has been true for me for more than 10 years. It doesn't matter where I am in the world, if I'm rested, if I'm tired. So figuring out what your power focus hours can really demultiply your competency and how you contribute to your work. And with asynchronous workshops, you can start tapping into those power focus hours, possibly shifting your own ordinary decent working hours to the hours that work best for you and your circumstances. This all needs adaptation to everyone. There's no magical stuff. And then about time, there's something else as well, which is that synchronous often means that the workshops and the meetings are often way too dense to be productive. You've flown everyone in, or you trained everyone in, and everyone is here, and there's lunch, and everyone booked time off their calendar. So you want to make the most of those 2, 3, 4, 8 hours. And there's this belief that because we're all here, magic will happen. But there's this attempt to cram so many things, and tell me, put it in the questions if you've seen something else, that so much has been going on in terms of, people try to book other meetings and to have other discussions. So synchronous meetings and workshops are often way too dense to be productive. So what about the asynchronous ones? Well, it's the same number of hours and possibly less. It's just very differently spread across a week. So that means that people regain control over their time, and regaining control is often the key to very good engagement from your employees and teammates. So we've seen purpose, we've seen time. Let's look at people. And if you want to drop in there, who do you think are the right people for good meetings and workshop? I'm going to open the Q&A here, so you feel like you're contributing to this talk and we're making it your own a little bit. So type in questions, all the questions that you have, and particularly tell me, what do you think are the right people for good meetings and workshops? Trying to see how many people are listening to me right now. I know there's 28 of you. Quite a few that I know, actually. All right, let me continue. Type this in your time. Whoever comes is the right people. Yes, Steve, that's a very, it's a very interesting state, and that's very trendy, agile community. Whoever in the room is the right person. Further to that, there are also more right people. Let's have a look at them. Well, first of all, you want to make sure that all viewpoints and experiences are represented. You want to be as 360 as you can in who's in the room so that you're not missing out on viewpoints, experiences. And you want as few proxies as possible. Proxies being somebody speaking on behalf of somebody else or somebody being a representative. One of the proxies that I would tolerate being a UX designer is the user researcher or the UX designer speaking on behalf of the users, whose views and experiences they bring in because they've conducted research and they bring those insights in through maybe the medium of personas, maybe the medium of research quotes or research memos, research insights. But you really want as few proxies as possible. You want the right person. You don't want somebody to be there on behalf of legal. You want legal in the room. Actually, you do want legal in the room very often when you're developing digital tools. And you want key stakeholders to be present so decisions can be made if it is culturally appropriate. You will see that different cultures take decisions at different times. The UK tends to make decisions in the meeting. The French will make the decisions in back channels after the meeting. And that's the way it is. So have a check, make sure that you know who the right people are, and then you have a better chance of having a better, a much richer meeting. The next item I want to talk to you about is place. And this is where the synchronicity and asynchronicity is really going to kick in. We know that what is best for synchronous meetings is an inspiring, spacious room, plenty of different surfaces and media for capturing insights and thoughts. Inspiration comes in all forms. It can come from shapes and colors and plants and imagery. It's not unusual to prepare workshops with putting challenging information on the walls, bring some posters, bring some quotes, bring some objects. In workshops, I like to bring little things that people can fidget with, whether it's Play-Doh or kind of sort of Lego bricks, so that people think differently if they can engage their brain in multiple ways. And of course, plenty of different surfaces to write on. And space is essential. Some people will need literally physical space to perform better. Don't make them sit around a table, let them move around, let them free their spirit, free their mind, so you really have rich insights. What about asynchronous? Well, asynchronous, you know you need to tap into people's power focus hours, and you've got accessible digital boards. So here's an example of a Miro where there is one artboard that is about how a team decided what to research and how they would all do some things. So the place needs really accessible digital whiteboards. Synchronous needs really accessible, nice big rooms with plenty of space to type on. So they're sort of interchangeable, I might hear you say. So far, it might seem so. Let's dive a little bit into the detail that make them really different so that you get to see when to run an asynchronous workshop and when to run a synchronous one. Because behind every good workshop, you have a facilitator. And the facilitator is the person who plans ahead the appropriate group processes, creates and sustains a participatory environment, and guides group to appropriate and useful outcomes. Now, this definition comes from the International Association of Facilitators, which is one of the organizations that you get lots of resources from. I will give you the links at the end. And as you can see, a facilitator is not a knowledge contributor to the process. And I find that in some of the workshops we run in teams, we have double hats on. As a UX designer, I very often have double hats on. I have a facilitator hat and I have a contributor hat. And it's really hard to switch the hats. And I very often prefer to have only one single hat on so I can fully dedicate myself to the task on hand, but also this clarity in the participants as to how to handle my comments and my contribution. So pure facilitation is actually really hard work. There's a lot of planning and there's a lot of very hard work to make sure that in the time, in the space, whatever that time and space may be, you have a good experience and you have that last point, appropriate and useful outcomes. I sometimes hear things like, well, I'm a senior UX designer because I facilitate workshops, said someone with 1 year's UX experience who had no idea. We sometimes tend to promote people into these roles and throw them into functions without appropriate training. And I think running workshops is one of the activities that in my own career I had the least support and the least training on, whereas I find it actually really, really hard to be a good facilitator. And we'll see that in running asynchronous workshop, it gets even harder because you really, really need to understand what your role is as a facilitator versus a participant. Now, I want to tell you a little bit how you go from agenda. Oh, that's not the right slide, my friends. I'm seeing a little kerfuffle in my slides, but that's okay. I'm going to run with it. And that's because I'm introducing the concept of service design. And that's because normally you have an agenda to a good meeting or a good workshop. In this workshop, we will cover this, 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 and that. You might even have a schedule. At 3 o'clock, so-and-so will give us a presentation, and at 3:30, we will all take Post-its, and at 4 o'clock, we'll have tea, and at 4:15, etc. But in the case of an asynchronous workshop, an agenda will not work. And it will not work because you do not want to prescribe when people do things. You want to prescribe in what order people do things. So that means that a workshop is actually a service. And I want to give you an example of why it's a service. And if you remember, one of the definitions of a service is a verb. And for example, a workshop could be, we will be figuring out how we will deliver our app on time. Well, that is a service as a workshop as a service. I might trademark this. So if it is a service, then it needs service design. Follow me here for a second. Remember, keep asking your questions. I'm looking at my question box right here for you. And if you want service design, you need to figure out all the steps and bridge the gaps. You need to understand the dependencies and constraints, and you need to design for the participants and not the content. Let me dive a little bit more into applying service design to designing a good workshop as a facilitator. And you want to do it in 3 things. First of all, your participants are your channels of information. So if you see a service blueprint, and I've put an example of a service blueprint from Alberto Cagnel at the bottom, you've got those swim lanes, those channels, those lanes. If you want to think each participant is possibly a channel, is a swim lane in your blueprint, if it helps you to think visually about this. And you want clear desired outcomes for your workshop. You need to understand what success will look like for this workshop. And you may want or need some outputs. There's nothing wrong with having clear outputs if that's what your organization, your team, or your subject matter needs. But that needs to start at the beginning. And you also need to figure out how the feedback and the discussion loops will work. So for this, one of the things that I'm recommending is using digital whiteboards. Any will do. You want to use any brand, anything you've got a subscription. Frankly, they're relatively equal. There are individual preferences. The regular discussions, is Miro or Mural the best? Figma just came out with Jamboard. You have Google whiteboards, which are really basic. But if your organization is running Google Business Suite, use what you have. You have Microsoft whiteboards that are, also come with limitations. Make sure everyone can access them. Some are more open than others. If you've got third-party contributors, for example, suppliers, consultants, make sure they can access it. But pretty much they're all the same. So how do you leverage those digital whiteboards? Well, the first thing is I invite you to apply information architecture. Now, In the definition of the I Institute, information architecture is the practice of deciding how to arrange the parts of something to be understandable. Arranging the parts of something. It's a little bit like a game of Jenga, okay? And you want to very simply create clear editable sections. You want to grow your board so that it has a clear, visible, understandable structure. You want to lock the backgrounds. So whatever digital solution you might use, there's a possibility to lock backgrounds. And basically what you want is that as somebody's trying to move a sticky or maybe several stickies, all of a sudden they're not moving the framework with it. So lock the backgrounds. You might need to think into in layers. If you've ever used visual design software, you want to lock the back so that people can move the front, and you may have multiple layers of lock. In some workshops, I've even locked the finished content, because at one point I was like, okay, so we've agreed, this is it, no one's moving this anymore. Bam, lock it. And that's because we'll be using this somewhere else where there can be more iterations. The iterative cycle is really important. So apply information architecture to create clear editable sections, lock your backgrounds. Your board has to make sense on its own. This is really important. You always want to step back and try to look at it with fresh eyes. Try to look at it with the eyes of somebody who's just arrived. Try to look at it with the eyes of somebody who's never used such a tool. Rubber duck debugging if you're not sure how to make that work. And you want to use the use of tool features like notes, add comments, anything that your platform offers. Make it clear to your participants when and how they should use it. For example, they can @ you so that you see they have a question if they want some support. And let me continue. So question from Steve, let me answer that. I'm not a visual information designer. I feel to apply information architecture is important. It scares me. What advice do you have? And if you think of information architecture as laying out on a blueprint, on a piece of paper for your house, where you want the furniture to go, and it's done at scale, okay? And when you do it on a blueprint for your home, all of a sudden you realize your sofa is not going to fit in that corner of the living room, or you fit that actually maybe the bed right under the window is not great because you can't open the window anymore. So you want to go clearly and think, where does this belong here? Does this belong with that? And does this makes sense in the order in which I do? Can I do this thing first, or do I need to have done something before? You want to think longitudinally, and then every now and again you go, what if before, or what should have happened before? You go back upwards, but before that I need to, but before that. And if you want to think that's longitudinally, that's one dimension. You want to think also simultaneously, and at the same time that, and at the same time that. So you kind of need to really, this is why the preparation is really important. You need to picture the dimensionality of the information you're going to collect and the actions that your participants are going to need to do. When you're preparing a real world workshop and you're thinking, okay, we'll divide them into groups and we'll give them topics and they will give them color stickies. Well, you need that prep. You need, okay, this group has all the yellow stickies. Do I have enough yellow stickies? What about Sharpies? And this group will have the pink stickies. Oh, wait, we have 2 colors of pink stickies. Are they going to be confused? All this, where are my tables placed? Where are they going to put the stickies? Are the surfaces sticky enough for the stickies to stick? Big problem of real-time workshops. So this is what I mean by using information architecture. You can translate how you would prepare a very, very good workshop, thinking of all those details. And again, look at those resources I will give you at the end about facilitation. There's a lot of information in there. I hope I've answered your question. Let me know. I'm going to continue for now. Another thing that I really encourage you to do is to create question zones visible to all, where people can drop simple stickies, and also provide links to basic how to add a sticky note video. Assume some people will never have used Miro, Mural, Jamboard, whatever your solution is. So make it easy for them. Go to YouTube, find some simple videos. I hope your organization allows people to access YouTube videos, or create your own 1 minute, 2 minutes. Here's how to create a sticky note. Here's how to move it. Don't assume people are good at this. Don't get them frustrated the first time they step into it. That would really kill engagement. It's so simple to give them a video. So how do you pull these together? Well, here's an example of a board I created. And there were boards for the participants below. I'm not showing them, they're not relevant, but these are a structure, a framework around it. There was a big central inspiration board where I had dropped information that I wanted them to read and consider. This was done using Miro. So the M-I-R-O one, not the M-U-R-L one, which kind of sound the same and very confusing. So on Miro, there was this one inspiration board, and there was a big question board and the big insights I'd like to share. And in the notes and in the emails that prepared the workshop, I was making clear, drop your questions for me in the question box and drop things that you'd like everyone to know, insights you've been aware of that you'd like to share with other participants in the insights I'd like to share box. I know it sounds obvious, but once it's there, it lets people know they can ask questions and they can share insights, and there is support. You really want to create a very clear frame around everything that you do. Because what you're doing when you're conducting an asynchronous workshop and when you're preparing it, is that you're designing for empowered autonomy. You want your participants to feel they truly can contribute their best. And that is designed. That does not just happen. And for example, a participant must be able to, on their own, to contribute without real-time support or facilitator present repeating the instructions in a different way. If you've been a facilitator, there's inevitably somebody who, when you say, now take a sticky and take a pen and write the answer, they say, do I have to take a sticky? In some of the workshops I've done, I've seen so many of these, I start telling people, okay, do you all have sticky pads? Wave your sticky pads in the air. And everybody looks like an, like I want to look like an, they were just, now, okay, wave your pen. Do you all have a pen? You don't have a pen. Let me give you a pen. Now you take the sticky and the pad and you write. I know it, but people get into a very tunnel effect when they are in high stress situations. Always remember that as a facilitator. The tunnel effect means that our brain has been designed in high stress situation. These are my high stress situation, doesn't have to be yours. High stress situation, I am running with adrenaline and cortisol, which are the two stress hormones. My brain is going to hyper focus visually and auditorily, and I will process information very selectively because I am in spot the danger and run away from the danger mode. This is the fundamental chemistry in our bodies that got our race to survive when we were naked and in the jungle with wild animals for whom we were a very, very tasty snack. So the tunnel effect means people do no longer have peripheral vision. They literally see a very, very tiny effect. If you've ever run usability studies, you will see the size of the focus area of people in stress situation is absolutely tiny. They do not see the image on the right. They do not see the computer. Very, very small. In a workshop, they hear things one by one. You need to be hyper prescriptive. If you're running an asynchronous workshop, you cannot support them in those high stress situations, but hopefully the asynchronicity should not generate so much stress. No one is feeling left out because everyone else is busy scribbling. No one is feeling left out because everyone else is asking questions. All of this is gone because you're all alone in front of your board. So some of the stresses are removed, and that's because you've designed it. Another point that your participant must be able to do is access support. That means you need to have designed how they access support and what they access. You need to enable them to understand what has happened if they join after others. And this is a case of designing, and this is where if you know a little bit of UX, it will help. You need to think in states. What does my board look like when it is blank, empty, and no one has done anything? What does it look like when people start dropping things in? Does it still make sense? Do the addition of insights, for example, could it cover the labels? So maybe move your labels so that when people add their stickies or comments or images or whatever it is, they don't hide the labels. So the structure remains visible at all times. That is design. Okay. Be clear on the rules of engagement. For example, one of my favorite rules is do not move someone else's sticky. Big no. You add a comment. In a real world, when we have literal physical sticky notes and we have to put them on the wall, the temptation, then we have to group them, your classic KG method, affinity diagramming. The sticky can only be in one single place. So people can, oh no, I don't think it's here, it's there. And you move the sticky and you have arguments. On digital whiteboards, you can add comments. Use the power of the technology, leverage its capacities. But be very clear, have clear rules of engagement for everyone so that they know what to do when they feel like they need to contribute. Remember to keep asking your questions. Don't wait for the end. We're halfway through this workshop. This is going really just on time for me, but I want all your questions. This is for you. So how do you design for this iterative, for these workshops? Well, first of all, you want to design for iterative progress. And this is also something that is much easier to do in asynchronous workshops than in real-time workshops. In real-time workshops, if you're using some techniques, and again, the KG method, affinity diagramming comes in, where we know this is a technique that works best when you redo it. So you take all your stickies with you insights, you group them into categories, you label the categories, and then you break them apart and you do it all over again and try to see if other categories come up, because inevitably lots of insights belong to several different groups. So here's how you could design a workshop for iterative progress. You have a first iteration, a sprint of effort, and very important, a facilitator sprint. Carve the time, schedule the time, plan the time for you, the facilitator, to review and comment what the participants added to the board, reassess the plan, and redesign if needed. If you do not carve yourself this window of time, you will struggle, especially if you're dealing with time zones that really overlap. I did a workshop where I thought I would have time the next morning to review, but actually by the time the US were done, the UK was almost starting, and I had slept some and it didn't work. So carve yourself the time for a facilitator block. So that means you tell people whatever you want. Monday and Tuesday, you do your part, come back Thursday. Wednesday is my facilitator sprint. I'm using agile Scrum vocabulary, but you want this block of time for yourself. And then you do a second iteration and a third, and how many as you need. And remember to include, another sprint of effort, another facilitator sprint. You want to ensure distribution of final results. And this is what you all need to communicate. You need to communicate when those iterations will take place, when the time blocks are, and you need to tell them, and on Monday, you will have Monday evening UK, Monday evening Barcelona, be clear where you're this from. I'll distribute the final results so people know where it's getting. So by this point, you've designed the content, you've designed the progress, you've figured out your timelines. And in terms of timelines, I'm not going to be too prescriptive because all your circumstances are going to be very different. It's quite different to work, and it's the complexity of the topic on hand, the number of people involved, but in general, experiment with this format, with your organization and with your topic. See if you can spread things across multiple days, multiple weeks even. The point is to get to the desired outcome. If the outcome is urgent, try to see what you can learn faster. But if you have a little bit of time and if you can plan ahead, then spread across time to really get richer engagement. But what will be critical is getting that engagement. So how do you think you can get participants engaged and highly contributing to asynchronous workshops? Do you want to drop in some thoughts into the Q&A or the chat? I see there still is 26 of you. I'm sure you have questions and comments. So how do you think you can get engagement from your participants? Anything you have tried maybe and that you've seen work or you've seen not work? Type it in. I'm giving you a second to do that. And if you've never run a synchronous workshop, that's okay. Type your ideas. So Steve says, engagement, clear purpose for an activity. Yes, absolutely. Giving participants a clear purpose will help them. What else? Sylvia, they need to believe that their feedback will be taken into consideration. Yes, spot on, Sylvia. They need to feel that they are effectively and usefully contributing, that this isn't a waste of their time. You've got this. And let me provide a few of mine while you continue typing yours in. You engage on outcomes, but not the process. The asynchronous workshop process, until it is very familiar and well mastered, is going to be scary. So don't make people excited because they're going to be riding this new bike. Make them excited because they're going to eat in this great restaurant. Engage them on the outcomes. Make them participate to the outcomes. Provide a series of upfront items. First, very clear expectations of inputs. Okay, you want to empower people to supply all the necessary information for others to engage so as not to stop or slow everything. I've written you very wordy slides, but I know many of you might just look at the slides or might just look at the replay, and I want to make it clear. So again, this is designed. You design, you think ahead. How are they going to feed it? How are they going to put their feedback, their thoughts? So very clear expectations on inputs. People are really empowered to give everything they need. And this is where the platform you use for your workshop will help. The richer the media the platform can take, the easier. Maybe Steve would like to add a PDF so that people can see the PDF, or maybe he wants to add a link that people can go see that SharePoint document. And maybe Sylvia wants to direct them to that website over there, and so on. So clarify, make it clear. You want to offer very clear support paths, including expected response times. And the expected response times could be, one more time. Expected response time is particularly for your support. So this is where your facilitator sprint review or how quickly you can bring and respond to comments plays in. You know, if right now somebody on in BC, British Columbia, Canada, has a comment for me, well, right now they're asleep, very much so. They're going to wake up in a couple of hours. So I will get their comments probably in the middle of my night. I have had actually my phone ping at 2 a.m. when I forget to turn it off. So you need to have very clear support path and tell them how quickly you will answer them so that they don't feel blocked or stopped. And you want to give them an expected commitment time. You need to tell them, 2 hours in total over a first 3-day sprint. And then hopefully your organization has hired competent adults and you let them competently adult. You let them be the professionals they were hired to be. You don't babysit them. You don't drop into the board all the time. You don't react at every comment. You let people be the professionals that they are. Empowerment comes from giving the power out. And you also want, when you're getting to engagement, this big thing, you want to manage no-shows and drop-offs. And for this, the only comment I have is this is a blank slate because it's going to be very, very organization dependent. Every organization is going to have things differently. You might be in an organization where there's consistently people not coming into meetings to accept that they don't come. You might be in an organization when people say they come, they all attend, meetings start on time to the minute and so on. But you need to understand what's going on. Why are people not showing up or why are dropping off? Go chase them a little bit and possibly one technique that I've used is lock the board to no-shows. You haven't come in, the train's left the station, we're now in iteration 2, I'll get you next time. Or you want to get them back into the next iteration. Okay, we've finished iteration 1, don't worry about that. Get into iteration 2, add your piece. But you want to actively manage them. So you need to get a sense of who's coming in and why are people dropping off. That will take conversations. Probably conversations better than survey. You want maybe to have a quick chat on whatever your comms mod is and see what's going on in there. And you want to challenge people to good behavior. If they do show up, so we've covered the no showing up, we forgot how to get them engaged. What do they do when they don't show up? What to do when they do show up, because you want good behavior. And this is where the facilitation comes in. And it's really hard when you're not in the room and you're not spotting all this. As a facilitator, you get a sense with your eyes, with your ears, but with everything that you have of what's going on. And in particular, what's very interesting with asynchronous workshop is a series of things cannot easily happen. There will still somebody somewhere to try to do it. And what cannot easily happen in an asynchronous workshop is, in particular, you cannot shine above everyone else. So people who are used to being teacher's pet or the most intelligent person in the room, they will struggle. There's no way to shine. You cannot have bigger stickies than everyone else. You look like an idiot, okay? You cannot hide behind everyone else. It will be seen if you don't contribute at all. You cannot lick it up to someone. I mean, some boards have features like stickers, like thumbs up and little emojis, but it gets a lot harder. It's a lot less what can happen in a real-time workshop where somebody can say, oh yeah, what Samantha said is really great. Samantha, I really, really love what you said. Oh, did you see Samantha? It's such a good contribution. A lot of buttering up happens in workshops because in real-time workshops, all the interpersonal dynamics take place as well as the workshop. In the asynchronous, the interpersonal cannot happen quite as well, whilst the workshop still happens. And I find this fascinating. What else? Somebody cannot belittle others or their contributions quite as easily. And it's very important. There's some very toxic behaviors that I'm describing here, including bullying, silencing, ignoring others and their contribution, and stealing ideas from others. And very interestingly, in an asynchronous workshops, all of these are really, really much harder. They will ask the perpetrator of these classic bad behavior moves to either rethink how to do this in the digital space, and some of them will wrap their head around it. Remember, people do things for a reason. They do things because it works for them. So anybody who is in a habit of, I don't know, stealing ideas from others, it has worked for them. It got them where they were in their career. They're not going to stop anytime soon. In an asynchronous workshop, it gets a lot harder, and especially with digital tools, all of a sudden, you can see people who like reassign stickies. You can see who wrote what. I'm seeing a question from Sam. Let me take it in. Do I find using asynchronous workshops means the project takes longer compared to using synchronous techniques? It's a very good question, Sam. The asynchronous means that the time is distributed differently. So you need to view it as it will still be 8 hours, for example, but instead of being a day, and a day feels manageable, maybe it's 2 hours over 4 days. That still isn't a week. That still is a day. So asynchronous are not necessarily longer and should not delay, but you've got to work with the deadlines that you have. This said, remember, asynchronous works particularly well if you have real challenges getting people synchronized. This is where you start looking at them primarily. But also when you want to empower people, if you've got flexible working hours, again, constraining people to be in the workshop from 9 to 5 on Thursday the 17th may not be easily manageable. The amount of prep work that needs to block that time may actually be what really delays your project. So you're actually moving time around. This is why it is not strictly comparable, but it has, I believe, more or less the same time impact on your organization. So because it's new, it may look like it's taking longer, but really when you think of the time it has taken to organize everyone in a room, you might be winning. Every organization will be different, and it's worth a try to see how it works for you. Let me know if that answer was good for you, Sam. Because what really matters, and actually Sam's question is bang on the dot for that, is, I hope I did capture your question. Yes, sorry. Is the importance of culture. And this is where the format is a new experience for everyone. And novelty can be good in certain organizations. But engagement is much harder to get because no one can hide, and everyone ultimately is vulnerable. And that really brings us to the fundamental question that every facilitator must ask: is there enough safety in the organization? And this is what you want to assess by, for example, allowing people to be visible. Are you creating risk? Are you protecting them? Are they actually safer in a meeting where they can hide? Maybe not progress, maybe not shine, but they're safe-ish. Or is it better to try other formats and manage these discussions? If you are in an organization where you believe there is a negative culture problem, there is rampant bullying, there is rampant, I wouldn't say discrimination because that's very subtle and it's the sum of lots of actions, but bullying, belittling, silencing, ignoring, stealing are your classic negative behaviors that make people feel unsafe. When they're the victims of that, you want to assess how it's at and if really you can take this on. Because the real question is it worth it? I mean, we could just roll into a room and hash it out, right? So I conducted a workshop and I asked some of my participants to get in. Interestingly, in this workshop, and I'm putting it all on this slide for you now, there was quite a significant drop off. People never showed in. I don't think they ever showed in and logged into the board. And then they dropped off progressively. And when I shared specifically, and when they came into the workshop, they knew I would ask them feedback at the end. That was an important part for me. So far, I've only got 3 answers. And what I've found the most interesting of these 2 answers are the answers to these 2 questions I asked them. So first of them, I asked them, what did you like the most about the asynchronous format? And here are the 3 answers of my participants: no time limit. It was so nice to have the time to read people's answers and tour the board in my own time. to read other participants' boards and see other points of view. And think again of all those synchronous workshops where everyone is doing things at the same time. And ask yourself, do you ever feel like you have a good grasp on all the information that's being shared? Is it really becoming collective information, or is it becoming actually a collective dump that will need further exploration? And I don't believe a collective dump where everyone's put their thoughts, their insights, their data points is necessarily a collective intake. Asynchronous allows way more intake than the synchronous workshop, depending on the scope and size and number of people. Of course, the more people in the synchronous workshop, the less time you can do. And the second question I had from a participant was this one: will you consider participating again in an asynchronous workshop, for example, with clients and colleagues? 2 of them said, I will be looking forward to it. And 1 said, I will give another one a try to see. I had the option. I never want to take part in a synchronous workshop again. No one selected that way. And also they didn't want flat out. It's not easy. It's not simple. And I believe that every workshop will be different. Every facilitator is different. Just like, every workshop room is different. Every digital board solution is different. So it will change, but you want to give it a try. I think there are really good signs for some of the content. Remember the kind of topics that I highlighted in the beginning that this is particularly good for. I think it's really worth it. And it is worth the extra work for this series of reasons. And again, I'm giving them to you as a dump. Employees really value feeling heard. It brings back to the point that Sylvia made in the comments earlier on. People need to believe their feedback will be taken into consideration. And we know this really drives employee engagement beyond workshop engagement. And these asynchronous workshops, they enable to shine the shy, the introverted, the autistic, the insecure individuals, amongst others. And these are personality traits that I think are fundamental to workplace diversity, and some work disciplines will have a lot of these non-high participation behaviors. If you look at data analysts or legal, people who are used and who are very good at managing massive amounts of information in their head, and who are not necessarily very good socially, and their job doesn't ask of it. If you try to bring them into workshop and make them put stickies and discuss and wave and like and thumbs up and emoji, that is so far out for them. And yet their contribution is absolutely necessary. We need those different personalities in the workplace. Some disciplines have much more introverted people. I think, for example, of user researchers, if you look at your user research team, it's very likely you have a lot of introverted people in there. Do you know why? Can you think why you have lots of introverted user researchers? Drop it into the chat or into the questions if you have an idea. That's why I value the fact that we give these people an opportunity to come in. I ask you tough questions, I know. You can also always ask me questions after the talk. You can find me easily. I've got a weird name, and Baguette UX is easy to find. I'll give this one when it comes in. You have lots of introverted people because in user research, it's all about making others people talk, and introverts are really good at this because they don't want to talk themselves. As simple as that. They're so good at making everyone else talk and never have to say anything themselves. Asynchronous workshops also tempers down the effects and remit of your over-talkers, your meeting hijackers, your seagulls. Do you know the seagull, the swoop and poop? They come into the meeting 3/4 of the way through, they look at it, they drop 2 huge stink bombs, and then they go out, leaving a big mess behind them. I have very little esteem for these people. Unfortunately, they're in some organizations, they could do that. We've got about another 10 minutes of this, Sylvia. We're also going to be able to handle in asynchronous workshops your hippos, your highest paid person in the room, the CEO, the head of HR. And when they are, Bob's got an interesting comment. I'll come back to you, Bob. So I once did a workshop with a group of people in an incredible heat wave. It was so hot in this room, and everyone was the most attentive, the most engaged, the most participatory I had ever seen in years of running a workshop. And I only figured it out at the end. The head of HR was in the room with them. So they were all on their absolute best behavior. I was actually quite tempted to systematically invite head of HR, to be honest. But otherwise, you see very important people completely change the dynamic, sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worst. And overall, you really could get much, much better contributions from asynchronous workshops. So Bob says introverts often don't listen. I think there's a lot more to that. Are they being in shock, or actually they listen, but they don't let you know that they listen? We can have a long conversation on this. So this brings me to my final question. Will you try it? Will you try running an asynchronous workshop? Here are 3 facilitation resources that I invite you to look at. You don't necessarily need to train, but I think they give you good information. IF World, Organizing Engagement Association of Facilitators. You might know others and more. They're everywhere all over the world. Because fundamentally, this is why asynchronous workshops work well. It's because they are well facilitated. And as you could see throughout this talk, it requires a lot of preparation. I know a lot of workshops, and I'm guilty of that at times, work because the facilitator jumps in and course corrects and manages what happens. The board doesn't work, the projector doesn't work, the video, all these real-time events that you don't have. In an asynchronous workshops, these goes out of the door. The video will play because you've tested it multiple times, and there's no real life scenario where it doesn't work. So will you try it? And what are your questions? Over to you. You can type them in the Q&A, you can type them in the chat, ask me anything, or make some comments.
Awesome, thanks, Sophie. That was a great session. Yeah, so many awesome practical tips, and yeah, certainly made me rethink how workshops and meetings should be run. Yeah, and I love the application of information architecture to workshop design. That's awesome. I'm not sure, I can't see any more questions come in.
Oh, they might come in. Hang on, look at them. Nope, they're just comments.
Awesome. Well, now you're
finding valuable. Okay, let me ask Steve and Kirsten, what was valuable about this for you? Where were the gems for you? Actually, everyone can answer this. What did you hear today or saw today that you hadn't heard or hadn't grokked or hadn't seen from that angle? Sometimes we forget to focus on the good things. And that might encourage others to try this technique of asynchronous workshops, which is all very new to everyone, to be honest. Lock the background. Yes. Sylvia, you're spot on. We all do this mistake. Locking the background is like the stupidest tip and the most useful one ever, when all of a sudden people don't have to see the board explore. Catherine, you hadn't heard the Seagull analogy. Oh yeah, you probably have been in meetings. I absolutely despise this kind of behavior. And it usually doesn't go very well when I'm in the room and I'm facilitating things. Tend to be quite hard. And again, they cannot do that in an asynchronous because there is time to pick it up. Whatever seagulling is going on, and they try to dump something on the board, such as, oh yeah, this cannot work because we don't have the budget. When you're 90% through figuring out the solution, you thought you had the budget, you're not quite done. Time is on your side. So Bob asks, I like this one, trying to bring together people of different impairment to find solution. This is not a service available, so create one ourselves, but how? So Bob, I'm understanding your question as you're trying to bring in an asynchronous workshop, people with different abilities and different impairments. I think this is a very interesting case of seeing what is the best way to empower everyone. And again, if you think of the difference with synchronous workshop where everyone is at the same time, needs to shout to be heard, needs to move to be heard. I think asynchronous with the right platform can really empower people who use, for example, speech text, have the time to type in their input, and their input is visible to everyone in their own time. People who use screen readers as well. I would say probably most of the solutions are not very usable, but you probably can integrate this in your iteration sprints, which you have a sprint of review and sharing in a format that works for screen readers. And I think lots of work needs to be done, particularly with the platforms, to make them accessible, to facilitate. You know, could be, for example, if you're using a lot of people who are deaf and who are used to sign language, could everyone, you know, just drop in little videos of themselves? Explore and push the system. Does it get a lot easier if I can view, the whole point is being able to view everyone's contribution in my own time, but also contribute in my own time and being fully empowered. And I think there are multiple solutions for this. I'm very much looking forward to somebody trying to run an asynchronous workshop through maybe a series of edited videos. Who knows? Maybe it's, you know, one of the, I'm thinking of the TikTok, the Siemens songs where everybody takes the video and puts over one another, you know, embed the video of somebody. I think there's so many digital tools at our disposal today that are so much more accessible than what we had 3, 5, 10 years ago. We really need to think ahead and being facilitators and getting that engagement, leverage all those tools for the ultimate goal. We want everyone's contribution so that we get to the best outcomes. I hope this answered your questions.
Awesome, thanks, Sophie. We have one from Simon here actually, who asks,
yes.
Are you doing more asynchronous workshops because of the COVID situation? And do you expect this to be the norm?
So I am definitely doing more asynchronous. I've begun doing asynchronous definitely because of COVID, but also because I'm realizing that getting somebody to dial in at 3 a.m. is cruelty, and it's not okay. So as my part, as somebody who organizes the workshop or facilitates it, it's my part to figure out how do I make this person contribute without submitting them to cruelty. And also I've seen people be, you know, they're good enough to be able to make some sense at 3 in the morning, but they were not at their best. And I don't like to put people in a situation when they are far from their best. I don't think it's fair, and fairness is very important for me. Thanks, Simon. That was a good one.
Awesome, thank you. And I think, yeah, we've probably got time for one more. Question here from Kia. And Kia asks, yes, how would you handle a workshop with French and British colleagues present? When would decisions be made?
I really like this one because indeed the French, I'm French, by the way, if you didn't know, and you have to understand that it's culturally very, very French, that the decisions will be taken in back channels after. And I think with asynchronous, you can integrate those back channel conversations into your iteration sprints, but you need to go and explore and inquire how those back channels work, who is the ultimate authority, and make sure that they have the right information to have the right conversations. In many ways, you want to sabotage all those back channel conversations, which are also people dynamic conversations, by presenting the information differently and invite them to play a little bit more cards on the tables while saving face. The very Asian saving face, do apply it a lot with the French. The Brits don't have a problem because it's the game and they negotiate. It's a lot more flatter, although it's not completely flat. But I think it's a great opportunity to try to change the dynamics and cut these completely different behaviors that create a lot of resentment and tensions in international organizations. And I think Franco-British organizations, I see this a lot, and we all need to work at, you know, engaging in better behaviors that benefit everyone. And I'm not saying which one is the right one.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you so much, Sophie. I think that's just about all we've got time for. Yeah, what a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for watching. We're back at 3 o'clock UK time, so in an hour, for Nemensa's Head of UX, Joe Knowles, with his talk on how to cultivate individual and organizational resilience. There is still time to sign up. Head over to our Eventbrite page to grab your free pass. Thank you, Sophie, and yeah, we will see you back in an hour. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nemensa. Thanks, Simon. Who's watching. Bye.